Korea invading South Korea, and the UN getting together and deciding that they were going to go into aid South Korea. It was led by General Douglas MacArthur, the guy from the Philippines in World War II. He goes in at the bottom, he engages them in a fight, we get reinforcements, they go up through Incheon, they come down, they surround the North Koreans, we get a lot of them to surrender, and then the rest of them we drive up across the line. Should we cross the line? Should we not cross the line? Cross the line, not cross the line, cross the line, not cross the line. China's like, don't cross the line. We cross the line, China joins the war, and now we're fighting China and North Korea. It is mostly American forces. We are about 80% of the forces because of NSC 68. And we know that we can't rely on other countries to do it. And we know it's our responsibility as leader of the free world. So we do make up the bulk of UN forces that go in, but we are not the only ones there. All right, I think more or less that's where I left you off. Oh no, we left off with MacArthur. Okay, so MacArthur is like, okay, so now that China has joined in and we're going back and forth across the border, like this is ridiculous. Like the war should be over. Like we have the bomb. Like it just doesn't make any sense that we have bombs that we're not using them. Just give me some of your nuclear bombs. We'll blow up China. It'll be fine. And Truman's like, no. And that's where we left off yesterday. So after Truman denies the request to use the atomic bomb against China, MacArthur starts bad-mouthing Truman. Like, he doesn't know anything about what it's like on the battlefield. He doesn't see the men dying. You know, he doesn't know how to lead a war. And so, just FYI, just to let you all know, when you badmouth your boss publicly to the media, there could be repercussions. So Truman's like, and remember Truman has a temper. Truman's like, get MacArthur on the phone! And he's like yelling at him, and he's like, you're fired! And he's like, you can't fire me! He's like, you're right, but you are relieved of command! And so he ordered General MacArthur stateside. Like, you are no longer in charge of UN forces, you will come home. MacArthur, I mean, what are you going to do with your boss telling you this? So he's like, all right. So MacArthur shows up on a boat, like a huge naval boat. I want to say it's San Francisco, but it might be San Diego, but I think it's San Francisco. Anyways, there's a mob of people to greet him. He is a hero. He saved South Korea. He is a hero from World War II. Americans love MacArthur. He's like the G.I. Joe. All right? They just love him. And you know, Truman was back in D.C. watching the news and all these people congratulating, shaking his hand, and all this love for MacArthur. And you know Truman was like, there's nothing he can do. People just love MacArthur. So meanwhile, the war in Korea will go on for 3 years. It isn't over until 1953, and most of the fighting is going to take place literally right around the border. Us pushing them, them pushing us pushing them, them us pushing. We will not use total war in Korea. We will not bring in nuclear bombs to solve this problem. All right. In the meantime, other things happen as well. So, the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg trial. I told you yesterday that how could it be that the Soviet Union got the bomb so fast? They had to have a spy. Now, we're not going to find out who the spy is until much later. But right now, in 1950, going into 1951, we think we found the spy in Julius and his wife, Ethel Rosenberg. So Julius and Ethel are arrested for giving the secret of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union, which they swear they did not do. So it goes to trial. So 1951 is going to be the trial. Now, it's complicated. Julius and Ethel are immigrants, but they came when they were little. He is in the military. He worked security at Los Alamos. His wife Ethel and he were both members of the Communist Party in the 1930s and still are. His wife Ethel, her brother is a communist spy for Russia. So what Julius admitted was that he had taken some information using his security clearance. It had nothing to do with the atomic bomb. It had something to do with, what is it? The directional, he's not here anymore. Sorry. It had something to do with a schematic, but it had nothing to do with the atomic bomb at all. But he did, use a security clearance, take a schematic, give it to his wife, who typed it up, and then he smuggled it back into the base, and she gave it to her brother, who then gave it to the Soviet Union. So that they did admit to doing. But it was not. So it was not the missile. I swear, it was not the atomic bomb. So then they bring in the brother, and he gets up on the stand, and he was like, "They did it. They gave me the secrets, and I gave it to the Russians." Okay, so just FYI, if you are not in good relations with your brother, this is your future right here. All right? And Julius was like, "He's lying." So who are you going to believe? You going to believe the brother who's a communist spy who just said, "Yeah, that's true, he did it." I mean, all the allegations were already there. He already admitted to stealing a schematic, and he knew he'd get the death penalty if he was found guilty of giving the secret of the Soviet. And they were sentenced to die and were executed, swearing to the day they were executed, we didn't do it, we didn't do it, we didn't do it, we didn't do it. Just FYI, 50 years later, in 2001, the brother, who's still alive at the time, went on, I can't remember if it was 60 Minutes or 2020, and said, "Yeah, I lied. They didn't do it." Oh. That's what I said. So if you don't have a very good relationship with your brother, here's your future. And they were like, "Why did you do it?" And he was like, "They had me as a communist spy. Like, I was going to prison forever. But if I gave up my brother, my family would be safe." So he did. And he's like, "And I have lived with the guilt this whole time." Like, yeah, you did. So anyways, but to the American people, of course, and then later we find out who really was the spy. We're like, oh. Anyways, but to the American people at the time, we just had the Alger Hiss trial last year where, Alger Hiss convicted, and then in small print, like, oh, perjury. We thought he had sold us out. He was a high-ranking member of the State Department, and now Julius Rosenberg was in the military with security clearance. So it is true. They are here. They have infiltrated the government. They have infiltrated our military, just like they did in Czechoslovakia, just like they did in Romania and Bulgaria. So Americans are scared. So then, tell me it's next. Yes, it is. Okay. So then, in the hype of we're already like this, Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin goes on TV and is like, "We have to be vigilant. They are here. They are among us. You never know who they are. They could be your neighbor. And I want you to tell you, they have infiltrated the government. We have to track them down. I have a list." And he pulled a list out of his pocket. "I have a list of 205 federal government employees that are suspected communists." And the whole country was like, you don't understand. Like, this is terrifying. I mean, this is a well-respected senator saying he has a list of 200 federal employees that are suspected communists. And after the Julius Nethel trial, like, oh my gosh, Americans are terrified. It is far worse a Red Scare than in the 20s. We are spying on each other. I mean, it was like, it became hysteria in America, trying to find these communists. So if there are people down the street you suspected, you would call the police would show up, and they'd get a warrant, and they'd raid them to see if they really are. And suddenly it became, I mean, if you were like, oh my God, these people, and the communists, a lot of people were communists in the 1930s, you can't turn against them. That made you a communist sympathizer. Now you need to understand, if you're a communist, we labeled you as red. So apparently I'm now a communist today, but that's okay. If you weren't a communist, like, hey, I'm American, I'm good, but I feel bad for them. Oh, that made you a communist sympathizer? That made you pink. You're like, really? I like pink. Yeah, pink back in the day meant you're fired. You're a communist sympathizer? You sympathize with them? You're fired. There was no, oh, I'm taking this to violation of my civil rights. Not in the 1950s. If you were suspected of being a communist or a communist sympathizer, no employer wants you working on their payroll. You could be a spy. It gets even better. Your sister was a member of the Communist Party in the 30s, while she was living in a cardboard box. And she joined the Communist Party because, she was unhappy with her life, but she's not a communist. And, now she's definitely not a member of the Communist Party anymore. But she was a member of the Communist Party, and you are her sister or her brother. This is called guilt by association. That means that you are guilty because you are associated with a potential communist, and you also could lose your job. All literature that was considered possibly pro-communist is banned in America. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which is one of the documents we use in the American Revolution to justify our revolution, bless you, is banned in America. because it promotes revolution. It's a communist idea. But we get you know how we are. I mean, in World War I, we banned hamburgers because we hated Germany. I mean, we didn't ban them, we renamed them Liberty sandwiches. We get kind of like crazy because we're American. So, we banned A Christmas Carol. Scrooge. Now, it's not that Scrooge himself is a communist. It's the movie or the book were both communist because it shows a capitalist in a bad way, that he's not willing to share his money. Communist. By the way, that didn't last very long. People were like, seriously, you banned A Christmas Carol? Like, what's next, the Bible? So that didn't last very long, the whole Christmas Carol thing, but this is the mentality of America in the early 50s. We are terrified because of the Julius Caesar, because of their trial, because of the Alger Hiss trial, because of Joseph McCarthy's list. FYI, what happens to McCarthy is the press keeps hounding him who's on the list. Don't Americans have the right to know what government people are suspected communists? And he was like, we're looking into it. He becomes like the witch hunter, like with the torches, trying to find them. FYI, he never found any. Zero. Zero government employees were ever arrested for being communists. Zero. So the press was like, what about that list? And he was like, well, we're still looking into it. The press is like, did you really have a list? He said, no, they're here! They're here! And you know what? Truman is just as guilty as the rest of them. Truman? He's like the most anti-communist. He's like, no, they're harboring communists on army bases. And the army was like, wait, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, that's right. I know it's true. So the army sues him. Like, you don't get to talk about the army like that. And he goes to trial. And so, at the trial, which was televised on TV, so you could watch it, McCarthy's a nut. He's jumping up and screaming at witnesses. They had to escort him out of the room. In the end, the army's like, forget it. We're done. We're dropping this. We'll settle, whatever. And McCarthy lost all credibility. He's never reelected again. And he spends the next few years, he only lives a few more years of his life, trying to convince people the threat is real. The threat is real. FYI. On the down low. Okay. So the list. I mean, he really did have a list in his pocket. He admitted to one of his friends, because one of his friends asked him about the list, and after he dies, his friend tells people, it was a list. It was his grocery list. So it's like, I have a list. It's like, bananas. Communist. But anyway, but the hysteria, the McCarthy era hysteria is real. We really were afraid that they were here because of all the things that have happened. All right. So in 1952, there is a presidential election. Now, the 22nd Amendment has been passed, which says you can only serve 2 terms. And technically, Truman has served 2 terms. So he cannot run again. So MacArthur, the Korean War is still going on, by the way. MacArthur's like, I'm going to run. And people are like, what? And he's like, I'm going to run. I'm going to run and be president. I'll finish Korea. Everyone's like, oh, God. Because we know what he means by I'll finish Korea. He's like, literally, I will finish it, wipe it off the map. So people are like, that's not a good idea. And he's like, oh, no, it's going to be a great idea. It's going to be a great idea. It's about time we had, a good, strong general in there. And he's so popular. And so the American people are like, yeah, he's a hero. World War II, Korea. And, military people are like, oh, Lord. This is, not a good thing. And so it's Christmas. He's at a Christmas party. This is 1951, right? The end of 51, going into 52. The election is still up to come. And he's at a Christmas party telling people how he's going to run for president or whatever. And someone's like, so you're seriously, you're going to do it. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait to see who they're going to put up against me. And I'll take him down, I'll take them all down. He's like, great. He's like, yeah, I'll run against anyone. Anyone! Well, I wouldn't run against Eisenhower. Everyone's like, what? He's like, no, I wouldn't run against Eisenhower. I mean, Eisenhower wanted to do it. Because remember, Eisenhower's also a war hero, right? Defeated Hitler. He's well respected. And MacArthur also well respected him. And he was like, if he was running, I wouldn't run. They're like, really? Yeah. Eisenhower, you got to run for president. You'd be a great president. We know you'd be a great president. Come on, you've got to run for president. Eisenhower's like, I'm retired. I mean, he's like in his 60s. He's like, you know what I want to do? And they're like, run for president? He's like, you know what I want to do? Golf. They're like, we'll build you a golf course on the White House lawn. You can play every day. And he's like, Doug, you would be such a great president, a strong leader. We need a strong leader. And he's like, So fine. He's like, okay. So Eisenhower decides to run for president, and MacArthur backs out, and everyone's like, So Eisenhower wins because he is a war hero. People respect him. The man is the worst public speaker ever. Like, if you ever watch any of Eisenhower's speeches, he cannot read his speech without fumbling. God bless him. But he's old and nice, and people like him. So when he says stupid stuff, he said stupid stuff all the time. Like, he would say stuff backwards, and people would be like, oh, da-da-da. Instead of the whole country being like, moron, the whole country's like, it's like. And so, he's nice. Yeah, people like Eisenhower. He's sweet. It's also a nice time. And so Eisenhower is actually the president when Korea is resolved. He actually didn't have a lot to do with it. By now, we've already been fighting for 2.5 years, and everyone's tired of fighting. We're not advancing. And so he's going to be the one that's going to officially, end Korea, even though he didn't really have a lot to do with it. The negotiation had already been put in place by Truman. But in July, after he became president in January, the Korean War is settled by an armistice, so they agreed to stop fighting. There's no real treaty, but they did shift the line a little bit. So I don't exactly understand. Part of North Korea they gave to South Korea, and then part of South Korea they gave to North Korea. So it just the peoples that were there, they just kind of swapped it like this. But it's still at the 38th degree parallel. So Korea is still split, by the way. It is one of the few communist countries still around, North Korea. All right, so then now we have this great general. 1953 is a crazy year. So we get Eisenhower, that's good. Korean War ends, that's good. And then out of the blue, Stalin dies. I really do mean out of blue. It was as shocking as when Roosevelt died, and it was that quick. He wasn't sick, he just suddenly got sick and died. And there was, and this is totally rumor. I'm telling you rumor. It is rumored that he was poisoned. But autopsy will reveal by members of the Communist Party that it was, I think, a heart attack. So that's the official account, I believe it is a heart attack. But he, again, the rumor was that, but if he was poisoned by the Communist Party, they would, of course, cover it up. All right, but Stalin dies. So the Communist Party of Russia instills Nikita Khrushchev. I know it sounds so cute, his name's Nikita, it's so cute. Khrushchev realized, Stalin was in power for 25 years. So Khrushchev knew if he really was going to be accepted as the leader, he had to clean house. So he went through and kind of got rid of some of the old people that Stalin had had with him for a long time and replaced them with new blood to make his USSR his. And it took him almost 3 years to really get it together. So Khrushchev's going to have this sort of interim part where he is not very active in foreign things, but he is the new leader. And so Nikita Khrushchev takes over, so he's the next guy you do have to know. In the meantime, I want to talk very quickly about Vietnam. We will get into Vietnam more so when we get to that part of Gaddis in the book. But here's the situation with Vietnam. Vietnam was a French colony before World War II, and then Japan took it over. So at the end of the war, the Viet Minh, who were a group of intelligent Vietnamese people who wanted a free Vietnam, at the end of the war, when Japan was kicked out, the Viet Minh created their own independent Vietnam. They elected a president, Ho Chi Minh. They elected a Congress. They fashioned it after the governments of the West. But it was also the Cold War as a beginning. So Truman told France, what about your colony of Vietnam? Things are going back to the way things were before. It's your colony. So France sent troops to retake Vietnam. And so the Viet Minh, led by the president, Ho Chi Minh, are going to fight back. And there is a fight in Vietnam between the French and the existing government, which the French claim has no power. So the fight's been going on since almost the end of the war, of World War II. And so what happens in 1954 is France is tired of fighting. They fought World War II, now they're fighting in Vietnam. And so France calls a truce, and they bring in Ho Chi Minh to Geneva, and they sit down, and France is like, what do you want? And Ho Chi Minh's like, I want a communist Vietnam. And France is like, we're not relinquishing Vietnam to communism. And so they made a deal where they would split Vietnam in half, like Korea, where the northern half would be controlled by Ho Chi Minh and the communists, and the southern half would be a democracy, but only for 2 years. The plan was, at the end of the 2 years, all of Vietnam would vote of which one they liked better, and then all of Vietnam would become that. So the hope was that people would see a democracy is better, and then everyone would vote for a democracy, and we would have a democratic Vietnam. That was the hope. So Ho Chi Minh was given North Vietnam at the end of 1956. That's where we are now, right? Oh no, we haven't gotten to that. So who's going to run South Vietnam? It's only for 2 years. There was no time to hold an election. We just put a president in there and do that. Now, America was very insulted that we were not invited to this meeting in Geneva, so we told France that we had the perfect, bless you person to put in charge of South Vietnam. His name is Ngo Dinh Diem. He's written on there, right? Yeah. Yes. So we thought he was perfect because he was born in Vietnam, but he was educated in the U.S. I think he went to Harvard. He knows how democracy works because he's lived here for so long. He's perfect. So we send him, France agrees, and he becomes the leader of South Vietnam, where immediately we run into problems because he's Catholic. Vietnam is Buddhist, the entire country. And so he started his presidency by building a giant Catholic church with government money and then proceeding to tell everyone that they're going to burn in hell if they don't convert. That's a good way to win people over. In the meantime, Ho Chi Minh in the north is trying really hard to help the people. So he's built irrigation to help farmers. He's done all these great things to help the people of North Vietnam. So the people of South Vietnam are lucky, we got this guy. And his wife was horrible. She would spend government money on dresses. I mean, it was just, they were awful people. So when the 2 years came up, everyone's gearing up for this election. Ho Chi Minh's gearing up for the election. South Vietnam's gearing up for the election. And it became obvious from all the polls that Ho Chi Minh's going to win. And all of Vietnam's going to become communist. And Ngo Dinh Diem's and Eisenhower was you cannot let that happen. You cannot. We're the leader of the free world. We're not going to let South Vietnam become communist. So Ngo Dinh Diem did the only logical thing he could do. He canceled the election. And so South Vietnam remains democracy. And all the villagers and people who opposed, who wanted Ho Chi Minh, who were angry because we didn't get to have an election, begin to rebel. And that is our problem in Vietnam. They are rebelling against a government that is not nice. And they want Ho Chi Minh, who is a communist. So the rebellion is a communist rebellion trying to take out the government, which means we can instill the Truman Doctrine and give them money. All right, and we're not going to talk too much about the Viet Cong today, but that's a name for the villagers who don't have money who are going to try to fight. All right, so Khrushchev in the USSR, again, not doing very much, but he is keeping an eye on Eisenhower. And he is seeing how very pro-military Eisenhower is. Eisenhower believes, and said it multiple times, that he believed in mass retaliation. That if the Cold War ever turned hot, we would hit them with everything we had. And mass produce, right? We're going to mass produce these weapons, outproduce the enemy. And Khrushchev believes that, can we trust Eisenhower? Is East Germany safe? Is, Poland safe? So Khrushchev creates the Warsaw Pact. It is a military alliance between all the Eastern Bloc countries and the USSR. So Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, all their Eastern Bloc countries, plus the USSR. So that if the West ever decides to become aggressive and try to take back Poland, that would mean instant war with the USSR, and it would probably be nuclear. So it was their retaliation to NATO. So now we have two military alliances that each say if any one of us is attacked, this is like we're reliving World War I. And it worried Eisenhower a lot that this was done. So keep that in mind, because the next thing is the Eisenhower Doctrine. Eisenhower was very concerned what's going on in Vietnam could happen anywhere. The Warsaw Pact just shows Eisenhower's aggression, or Khrushchev's aggression. So Eisenhower creates the Eisenhower Doctrine. It takes the Truman Doctrine and then just elevates it. From this point on, the United States will help any country fighting communism with more than just money. We will send you troops. Which commits us now to sending troops to Vietnam. We must, per the Eisenhower Doctrine, per NSC 68. So we must send troops to any country fighting communism. It is our commitment. So we will escalate the number of troops to Vietnam. All right. Then your life will change forever in October with just one word. Sputnik! Or you can say it the American way. Sputnik. But that, it always sounds like a potato. Like, what you have for dinner tonight? I had some Sputnik. No. Sputnik is much better. Is how it is said. Sputnik. This is how Sputnik changed your life. Okay? What is Sputnik, Mr. Rango? Sputnik is the first unmanned satellite to orbit the Earth. The Soviets have shot a satellite up into the air. And it's like orbiting the Earth. Like hovering. It can hover over the United States. Now, Eisenhower, being a military man, immediately saw the military danger in this. Like, they could spy on us from space. It's unmanned, so there's no one up there, but what if they just had a camera up there and they're just shooting over the United States? They'd know everything. So Eisenhower is like, why don't we have one? Where's ours? And our scientists are like, well, you see, we ain't really working on one. And Eisenhower's like, what do you mean we're not working on one? They're working on a satellite, what about us? And it's like, well, we just don't have enough scientists. What do you mean we don't have enough scientists? Well, sir, you see, everyone in America, it's all about business. And what you don't know is that it was a required class for all high school boys. You had to take business. The #1 college major was business. Corporations wanted business degrees. All of you in this class, forget biology, you would never have had it. You would have been in business classes. We've got a nation full of businessmen, very successful businessmen. What we don't have are scientists. And you know what? Eisenhower's going to end that right now. Because you know what becomes required for all high school students? Science. You will not take science classes. So the next time you're taking that bio test, you can just be like, curse you, Sputnik. And everyone in the class will understand. And they'll be like, yes, Sputnik. Spit on you, Sputnik. And then Mr. Delgado will say, are you spitting in my room? And I'll be into that. All right, so anyways, but that is literally the day that changed education in America, where you will all take science classes now, and none of you have business classes. All right, Sputnik. All right, so let's talk about Castro. So I wish we had more time to talk about Cuba, but we don't right now. So needless to say, Cuba is just a hot mess. They have never had stable politics. They have had literally overthrow after military overthrow after coup, after political party overthrowing the existing government, since they became free from Spain. That is the history of Cuba. Corruption. Their president would openly accept bribes to the highest bidder. Like total corruption. So the last overthrow comes in like 1952. Batista takes over. Bad guy. Terrible guy. Such a bad man that the United States realized he's such a bad man. I mean, he would like order, like if there was a university like protest, he would order the military to go in and shoot. God, that's you! Protesting like we're doing a women's march. Oh, be careful. So we decided as the United States that we would not support him anymore, that crazy dictator, so we stopped selling him guns, which then meant that Castro has the opportunity to take over. So Fidel Castro, who is a communist, starts a revolution in Cuba. He is supported by a lot of people who hate Batista, a lot of poor people who are living in such squalor. The literacy rate is so low in Cuba, they have no education, and he's promising to change all of this. And so he gains quite the following. And on January 1st of 1959, Fidel Castro takes over Cuba. We do not know he's a communist. We had no idea. All right, so when Fidel Castro took over, we were like, thank God, you got rid of that crazy. So America reopens trade with Cuba. This is great. We'll start selling you weapons again. And then within a few months, Castro's like, I do not want any foreign-owned businesses in my country. And so he shut down and kicked out every American who owned a business in Cuba. including the mob, by the way. It's kind of fun. The mob owned a bunch of casinos in Havana, and the mob was like, what? And they're like, we're being kicked out. Like, oh, now you're like, it's the mob, Mr. Rango. Didn't they fight back? Well, you don't know Raul. The current president of Cuba, when he was young, you don't mess with Raul. Raul had, his answer to everything was, I shoot you in the head. He shot other revolutionaries who wouldn't join Fidel, killed them all. All of the military that fought against them, like when Fidel took over, Raul was like, round them up and execute all of them. So a lot of them like fled the country because they knew if they stayed, Raul would kill them. So the mob is not going to take on Raul. The man, by the way, he's only like 30 years old at the time. You can take on Raul. You can take on Raul. Now he's a little different now. He's, like 86 or whatever. He's a little more mellow. But he was like scary back in the day. So Fidel takes over with his little brother, who's like the scary one. And we don't think anything of it. And then when we start to see the things that Fidel is doing, we get kind of upset and we threaten to not sell him sugar anymore. Because we are not buying their sugar, because we're their number one customer. We buy 80% of Cuba's sugar, and that's the only product they have. You better stop. We hear you're talking to the USSR. And Fidel's like, you don't tell me what to do. And we're just like, oh, I think we do. And so when Fidel would not stop talking to the USSR, we're so snotty. You can't be friends with us and them. We stopped selling him sugar. We stopped buying their sugar. What do you think of that? And Castro's like, you know what I think of that? I think I'm a communist. And we're like, oh, what? He's like, oh yes, Cuba is now a communist country, nobody needs them then. And we're like, wait, what? So now what? And immediately they join the Warsaw Pact. So if we try to take over Cuba, that is an act of war against the Soviet Union. So now we have a communist country not that far. So this sucks. Oh no, it gets worse. But we thought Khrushchev was kind of a cool guy, because he's been kind of mellow. Right after this, Khrushchev's like, yeah, I just want the whole world to know I made a decision. Everyone's like, what's going on? He's like, yeah, I've decided that whole Berlin thing is just stupid, and that I'm going to take over West Berlin. I'll give you 6 months to evacuate the city. And Eisenhower's like, you can't do that. And he's like, watch me. And he started mobilizing his forces into East Germany. And Eisenhower's like, touching West Berlin is an act of war. And Khrushchev's like, I am not allowing half of a free city in my country, or not, in East Germany. And started building up his military. So Eisenhower calls up the military and is like, get ready. So we're like mobilizing all these forces into West Germany. And I remember that Eisenhower's strategy is massive retaliation. And we'll hit him with everything we have. And we have a lot. And so the people of America are like, holy crap, like World War III is about to start over Berlin. And Khrushchev will not back down. And the 6-month deadline of evacuating the city before he takes it is getting closer. And Eisenhower is like, this is like the worst thing ever. I'm going to be the president that starts a nuclear war. Millions upon millions are going to die. Like, this is awful. I need suggestions. And I don't know who made the suggestion. People were like, maybe you should talk to him face to face. Why don't you bring him here? See if he'll come visit. No communist leader has ever visited the U.S. And he's like, man, I'll do anything. So he calls up Khrushchev. Of course, Khrushchev's not going to come. We're just going to come here. Like, we'd like to invite you to come over here. Maybe we can talk about this. And Khrushchev's like, okay. I'll be there in a week. Eisenhower's like, really? Okay. Like, he's coming. What are we going to do? They're like, we got to, like, mellow him out. Like, we can't be, like, antagonistic. We got to be like, welcome. We got to get him to, like, relax. And so Khrushchev shows up with his wife and his grandkids. Like, the whole family, like, vacation. And so Eisenhower's like, welcome! We're going to go to Camp David. He took him to, like, I don't know, the big agriculture school in, like, Minnesota, and was like, look at all these, advances we made in agriculture. And Khrushchev was like, wow, that machine is amazing. God, I wish we had that in Russia. And Eisenhower was like, get him that, it's going to Russia. And like, where else? Let's go to California. They went to California, and Khrushchev's like, I want to go to Disneyland. and I am not lying. And like, the grandkids were like, we're going to Disneyland, we're going to Disneyland. And his Secret Service and our Secret Service were like, No! Like, you don't understand, because back then, all those big trees they have at Disneyland were all little baby trees, because Disneyland just started in 1955. It's very flat. And so, like, Secret Service was like, there's like 1,000 places for like a gunman to hide. Like we trust the U.S. government. We don't trust Americans. Like, there could be a sniper. I mean, there is no way you are going to Disneyland. And the grandkids are like, and he's like, well, the grandkids. And they're like, okay, the grandkids. So the grandkids got to go to Disneyland. Oh, we could go. But the grandkids came back like, Disneyland's great. I wish they would have brought him a hat and put the hat on and take a picture. It was so great, but that didn't. So anyway, so after the California trip and the fun Disneyland, they went back to D.C. They never really talked about it. Khrushchev and his family got on a plane, disappeared, and then Khrushchev's like, I have an announcement to make. I have decided to suspend the deadline in Berlin and just let things be. So technically, Disneyland saved the world from nuclear annihilation. So next time you see Mickey, be like, all right. he truly has. My earrings are in their honor. They're also red, kind of like communists. All right, so there we go. So that's Khrushchev visits the U.S. All right, the U.S.-Cuban sugar embargo has gone on. Now, once Castro has declared himself a communist and we sever all trade with Cuba and sever travel with Cuba and now we don't talk to Cuba anymore, we realize how dangerous this really could be. And so the CIA is like, I mean, Eisenhower can't touch Cuba. We cannot touch Cuba. All right, we cannot start an invasion. The CIA is like, it doesn't have to be us. What if we trained exiled Cubans? Like all those like soldiers that, you know, Raul was threatening to kill who like fled the country. What if we round them all up and give them guns? Give them American weapons, give them American bombers, give them anything that they need, and they start the revolution against Fidel. A lot of people in Cuba would love to see Fidel gone. Everyone in Cuba lost all their rights, their businesses, everything. So they would love to see that happen. So if we do that, then it's not an American attack on Cuba. And so Eisenhower agreed, Eisenhower agreed, and so we start training the CIA. The CIA begins training. They can't be on U.S. soil, so we do it in Guatemala. We start training these Cuban exiles. And Eisenhower gave the oath. All right. So in 1960, it is Eisenhower's last year. He has served 2 terms. There will be an election later. This is Eisenhower's last time. Khrushchev calls him and says, hey, there's a summit in Paris this summer, in June. You know, we're all going to be there. You're going to be there. I'm going to be there. You know, France, all these other countries are going to be there. You know, we're going to talk politics, blah, 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 blah. How about afterwards, you come to my country. I show you how beautiful Russia is. Now, this would be the first American president to ever visit a communist country. And Eisenhower said, okay, that sounds great. Oh, I wish the story ended with, and they lived happily ever after. But it does not. It ends with, a month before the summit, an American spy plane, a U-2 spy plane, flying over the Soviet Union illegally, taking pictures, disappears off our radar. We lose communications with the pilot, Francis Gary Powers. What we don't know is what happened. Was it a technical problem and it crashed? Was it shot down? We got to find that plane. Like, we were spying on the Soviet Union, taking aerial photographs. So we send some bombers to go find the wreckage, and our bombers are met by Soviet MiGs, which are their bombers, and they're literally on the radio saying, you are in Soviet airspace, turn around and be shot down. And our bombers go like, oh, we're just looking for a missing weather plane. And the Soviets are like, you're in Soviet airspace, turn around and be shot down. You can't say, oh, we're looking for a missing spy plane, have you seen it? So we left, and then Eisenhower shows up at the summit, and Khrushchev is complaining to everyone how the Americans have been spying on me. They talk about how they want peace. Well, we have their pilot, Francis Gary Powers. We shot down their U-2 plane. They were spying on us, taking pictures. And Eisenhower shows up first. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. That never happened. We were looking for a weather plane. And then Eisenhower has to change his position because they have all the evidence. And Eisenhower is like, we're not going to be bullied by anyone, blah, blah. Khrushchev threw a fit. And he's another Truman, total temper. Storms out of there, says there will never be peace between us, and leaves the summit. So apparently the whole come to my country is like off. And then after that, he'll start building the Berlin Wall. Now, the Berlin Wall is built between 1960 and 61, the majority of it. It will continue, they'll add on to it later. It's not, I mean, of course it's being built to keep the people from escaping, but the big idea behind the Berlin Wall is that there will never be peace between us. We're going to build a wall that exists, right, between our two sides of the world, and it will never change. So it's very, like, symbolic of that. How's it going? Is it still recording?
It is.
Is it still recording?
It is.
Okay, good. All right, so that is the Berlin Wall. Should be under somewhere. Yeah, there we go. All right, so then we sever relations completely with Cuba, and then we have an election. Now, whoever's elected now has to deal with all of this. He's going to have to deal with Russia. He's going to have to deal with Cuba. He's going to have to deal with civil rights, which isn't on our Cold War lecture. But God bless whoever wins right now. Is in for a lot of issues to deal with. So it's one of the closest elections in American history. Literally, it's just a few 100,000 votes that separate the two candidates. But the winner is JFK. It was also considered a controversial election. The Republicans demanded a recount in Chicago because they believed the mob steered the election to the Democrats, which is probably true because the Republicans demanded a recount, but then JFK put his brother as Attorney General, who was in charge of the recount, and was like, no, that's good. So there you go. That's the way to do it, by the way. So now it's JFK who has to decide that. So JFK is inaugurated January 20th, right? His great speech, ask not what you're going to do for you, what you can do for your country. And then a couple months later, the CIA is like, okay, they're ready. And Kennedy's like, okay, who's ready? And they're like, the Cubans, the exiles we've been training for a year, they're ready. And Kennedy's like, I'm not taking on Fidel, I just became the president. Oh, you don't have to do anything. It's going to go so smooth. This is the plan. So let me just tell you the plan. The plan was, we have these American bombers that we painted to look like Cuban bombers. Kind of like, hey, I've got this Prius, let's paint it to look like a Ferrari. So it's not going to fool anyone up close, but at a distance, they'll just, like the Air Force in Cuba will see it and think it's their own planes, because apparently they're that stupid. So the plan is the bombers will fly to the airfield that is near the area where the foot soldiers are going to land, which is in the southern part of Cuba in a place called the Bay of Pigs. The plan is the bombers will go, they'll bomb the airfield so that the Cubans can use no air support to help with this landing, or to counter the landing, and then that will be like the whatever to get people to rise up in Cuba so that when the foot soldiers land, there will be total chaos already. There will already be people, in the streets rebelling, and then the foot soldiers will land and will just like help. Not us, they'll just help. And the U.S. Navy ships will be in the background, like looking all big and bad and intimidating, like in case anything goes wrong. But we can't help. All right, that's the thing. So that's the plan. And Kennedy's like, reluctantly, but it is his order. So he gives the order to do it. Problem is, our bombers and the foot soldiers are not in the same place. So the memos all have like different dates on them. So the bombers thought the date was the 15th, and the foot soldiers thought it was the 17th. So on the 15th, the bombers go. The Cubans are looking at it, taking pictures of the planes, the American, blatantly obvious American planes painted to look like Cuban planes. They bombed the airstrip, which was the signal, so the people in Cuba started like rallying. Raul's like, they will all be arrested and we will kill them all. And then nothing happens for 2 days. So they like round up thousands of Cubans who rebelled, put out all the fires, and then here come the foot soldiers, thinking the bombers had just gone. They're like landing on the beach, and there are all of Fidel's men waiting for them. And they're like, and they turn around, and the American ships had gotten them, figured it out, and were told, you can't help them. You can't help them. We can't help them. So they left. And so Fidel, took all of them prisoner. And then Fidel went to the United Nations and said, you know what America did? They did this and this and this and this and this. And here's the pictures of the planes to prove it. And the whole world was like, America. And Kennedy was like, fine. Like, you look like the biggest bumbling idiot ever. Welcome to the 3rd month of your presidency, and you look like the biggest idiot. FYI, Kennedy called Castro and was like, please don't execute them. Like, we sent them to their death. Please don't execute them. And Fidel's like, all right, but I want money. And Kennedy's like, all right. And this is, by the way, totally off the record. Off the record. So we gave him money, and we got the anti-Castro Cubans that we sent in there on foot back. However, all those other people, the ones that were arrested beforehand, all went to jail. And every day, 2 or 3 of them were executed. I will tell you, my dad was in jail in 1965, 4 years later, and there were still hundreds of them in the jail. And my dad, like, for the 6 months he was there, every day they would take 1 or 2 of them out